Well, welcome back if you have been with us this morning for the University of Arizona Mining Law Summit, and welcome if you're just joining us now for a continuation of our discussion on the theme of responsible mining and the green energy transition. My name is Christy Disney Bruckner. I'm Executive Director of Sustainable Development Strategies Group, and co-facilitating with me today is SDSG Senior Director, Ashley Smith-Roberts. And we have the pleasure of having a discussion today with three leading experts on this theme of responsible mining and the green energy transition. I'll briefly introduce our panel today. Danielle Laporta is a mining law specialist with the World Bank Group. In this role, she manages projects in Colombia, Sierra Leone, Romania, Brazil, and Liberia. She also leads World Bank projects on climate smart mining, an initiative that recognizes the increased demand for mineral production for clean energy technologies and the need to ensure production is aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Travis Lauder is a project manager for the National Renewable Energy Lab, where his work is focused on solar photovoltaic policy and finance, distributed energy resource innovations, and decision support for policymakers. Travis is a leader in NREL's work to integrate renewable energy into the mining sector through the Joint Institute for Strategic Energy Analysis. Perrine Toledano heads Columbia's Center on Sustainable Investment Projects on extractive industries and sustainable development. Her projects include research and advisory work on the impact of the energy transition and the UN Sustainable Development Goals on extractive industry investments in resource-rich countries. She works with governments and engages the private sector on a range of critical issues. So I'll turn it over to my colleague Ashley to get our discussion started.
Great, thank you so much, Christy, and thank you so much, everyone, Perrine and Danielle and Travis, for being with us this morning. We're so excited to have you. As we get started today, can you please give us a brief overview of the work that you're leading on the topic of responsible mining and the green energy transition?
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today and to present the work we're doing at the World Bank. Many of you probably are familiar with a report we published back in 2017, which is where our work started, looking at the materiality of the clean energy transition. At the time, I think it was the first quantitative analysis out there that really tried to understand which minerals and metals we would be needing for the clean energy transition, and also what are we talking about in terms of volumes of minerals and metals. Since then, our work has evolved and we've expanded our analysis. Just now in 2020, we just launched an updated report, and I will show you a little bit of a summary on that. Basically, what this new report does is update the data. We, as I mentioned, this data, this model that we used, the IEA, the International Energy Agency scenarios, to look at the amount of renewable energy that would be needed in order to keep global warming at 4 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius or even beyond that. So for us, we looked at these scenarios and we tried to map, if we're going to need, for example, wind, solar, energy storage, how much more minerals and metals and which minerals and metals we will need in order to deliver these climate goals. And we also looked in this new report on the demand risk for each mineral and metal. I mean, depending on technological changes, how will that impact mineral demand? We also tried to look a little bit and do a bit of a deeper dive into technological improvements and material efficiency and how that could impact mineral demand for the clean energy shift. We also tried to address a question that kept coming up every time we presented our findings, is the role recycling would play in meeting this mineral demand. Because sometimes we would present our numbers and people would say, oh, but we don't need any more mining. We can just recycle everything, right? So we tried to address how true that was, what the role recycling was in meeting the demand under a 2-degree scenario. And also, we just scratched the surface a little bit in trying to understand the carbon footprint of the minerals needed for the low carbon technologies and how that compared to conventional fossil fuel technologies. So that's the findings of our new report. But all this work is part of the Climate Smart Mining Initiative. And what the Climate Smart Mining Initiative does is really we try to address 2 issues with climate smart mining. One is the opportunity here for resource-rich developing countries, which is why the bank is doing this work. We want to ensure that resource-rich developing countries that do have these critical minerals and metals are part of supplying the demand that we will need in order to reach the 2-degree scenario, for example. But also we recognize that there is a big challenge with all this additional mining that needs to happen. And with climate smart mining, we try to address these challenges, which are manifold, not just from a climate perspective and an emission perspective, but also an environmental challenge that will come with the additional mining that needs to happen in order to provide all these materials that we will need for the clean energy future. And we do that by looking at the supply chain of these critical minerals, and we look at opportunities to minimize the carbon footprint and the material footprint, both at the extraction, processing, recycling of these critical mineral supply chains. So that's the work we have been doing in climate smart mining. I also like to point out that climate smart mining is not a new standard by any means. It's really just a new way, a new lens, and a new way of looking at these critical mineral supply chains.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for the important work that you're doing. And Perrine, would you like to share with us the work that you're doing as far as the green energy transition?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Christy and Ashley, for the invitation. So on this very topic at CCSI, we work at both the macro level and the micro level. At the macro level, we're looking at how resource-rich government can plan for the future of their mining resources, given the uncertainty linked to green tech development. And we're also looking at the regulatory framework for mining and how it should be updated to mainstream climate change concerns into laws and contracts. On the micro level, we are looking at how to improve the uptake of renewable energies at mine site. And this is the report that we published, I think a couple of years ago. It's called The Renewable Power of the Mine. And we're also looking at how these renewable energy plans could be shared with communities for SDG 7 achievement. We are also interested in how companies can build mining communities, climate resilience, climate adaptation. That's also, it's a new research that we are launching. And while we do a lot of research and giving advisory services on these topics, we're also running trainings on the same topics. And some of them are becoming now online. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Perrine. And Travis, how are you working at NREL to push forward the green energy transition?
Well, thank you. I would like to echo everyone's gratitude for having us speak here today. So NREL got involved in this space a little over a year ago, and we had the excellent work of Perrine and Danielle at their respective institutions to guide us. Really, NREL's biggest goals right now are to engage the mining sector directly. We published a report last summer called Integrating Clean Technologies into Mining Operations. And our ultimate goal, and we have ongoing conversations right now, but our ultimate goal is to work directly with the mining sector to assist them in achieving their carbon targets and their climate goals, as many of the mining majors and some of the midstream, mid-tier companies as well commit to international goals or sign on to goals with a particular trade association that they're part of. We, as a national lab of the U.S. Department of Energy, we have the technical capabilities and the analytic capabilities to assist with not only the R&D, but also the implementation. So NREL is very interested. We're a mission-driven organization, obviously being sort of a federally funded research and development institute, but the big goal here is to assist this sector in transitioning to meet the goals that they are setting forth for themselves and to exceed them to the extent possible.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all. Danielle, the World Bank's Climate Smart Mining Initiative has found that production of key minerals for the green energy transition, such as graphite, lithium, and cobalt, may increase by nearly 500% by 2050. What are some of the current trends, in addition to those you shared in your introduction, that you see in demand for minerals?
Thanks. Yes, so it's important to say that our numbers are really for energy generation and storage. We looked at solar, we looked at wind, and we looked at battery storage. So our numbers focus solely on that. And that is already a quite significant amount of more minerals and metals that we need in order to supply just that alone. But if we look at the overall infrastructure, for example, that we will require in order to deliver the low carbon future, that we have not factored in. So I think that there are some other elements that come into play in terms of demand. But as I slightly touched upon, I mean, we see, technological innovation playing a very key role in telling us where, this demand is going to be going, and if we're going to still see a demand for lithium, for example, or for cobalt, depending on what kind of battery technology you're talking about. I mean, we read all the time in the news, how new battery technologies are coming up and for example, trying to get rid of cobalt in batteries because of key issues along the cobalt supply chain. So a lot of these things will be defining demand and how we go about it. I also mentioned briefly recycling. I mean, we need to improve very much how we do recycling, and especially for these niche minerals like cobalt, like lithium, like some others. So if we are able to improve the recycling of these, that can also affect how the demand, for these minerals, how recycling can then also play a role in meeting the demand for these minerals.
Thank you. And I wonder also, what are some of the key strategies that the World Bank recommends to meet current demands in a manner that's aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
I'm going to share with you what we call the Climate Smart Mining Framework, which are these building blocks. The idea behind these building blocks is really we try to develop a framework that we could then help both governments and the private sector look at the supply chain for these critical minerals and metals and look for opportunities to minimize carbon footprint, but also to minimize the material impacts. And we have structured this framework in 4 pillars. On climate mitigation, climate adaptation, reducing material impacts, and creating market opportunities. So we have to understand that this matrix is also from the World Bank's perspective in terms of what is the value added of the bank. And that's why we have here, for example, creating market opportunities, because as I mentioned, for us, it's important that we support our client countries in developing these resources that they do have, but we want to ensure that they develop it in a sustainable way. So just to give a few examples here of what we're talking about, like for example, the integration of renewable energy. You know, there's a lot of research, a lot of companies moving ahead with integrating renewable energy in mine operations. We want to make sure that, you know, whatever knowledge and whatever opportunities are out there to make this a part of new mining developments, for example, be it in Africa or Asia or Latin America, is also happening. Another one, just to mention a few here, is innovative waste solutions. As I mentioned, you know, if we need all this additional mining, and we know, for example, that ore grades are declining for some of these minerals and metals, we will need to mine and move a lot more material in order to get the same amount of ore. So we know that the waste challenge is a huge one for the industry, and we would like to address that. But that's just to mention a few of them. So this climate smart mining framework builds into the SDGs, as you can see here from the slide, and we've mapped the 5 main ones that the climate smart mining framework can contribute. Before I conclude the answer to your question, we have been using this climate smart mining framework to develop what we are calling climate smart mining country roadmaps. And the first climate smart mining roadmap that we prepared was for Chile, looking at the copper supply chain in Chile and using the climate smart mining framework to do a gap analysis in terms of where Chile stood in being climate smart, and then helping Chile set goals in order to improve the understanding of them being climate smart, and at the same time helping link Chile's copper sector to Chile's NDCs, their national determined contributions, so that the mining sector would play a more important role in Chile's climate ambitions. So it was a long process, but it was the first climate smart mining roadmap that we developed. And now we're preparing one for Indonesia as well, helping government think through a little bit about how can they be more climate smart in their mining sector.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now turning to you, Travis. You have recently co-authored a report with the Joint Institute for Strategic Energy Analysis titled Integrating Clean Energy in Mining Operations, Opportunities, Challenges, and Enabling Approaches. What are some of the key findings from this report?
So the report took a pretty broad-based approach to the challenges, well, it's all in the title, challenges and opportunities of bringing more clean energy in to mining operations, but it also focused on everything from extraction to beneficiation and processing. So we looked at across the supply chain for where a mining company may have a particular business. And we looked at the technologies that might be appropriate at each stage of those operations, what some of the challenges are, how you can use technologies that are available today to power those operations, and what kind of forward-looking approaches might there be to reduce the carbon intensity of those particular processes. So one of the big findings of the report is that on-site mining operations, a lot of those loads are electrical. So the opportunity today to integrate renewables is very high, and it makes economic sense in several jurisdictions. Going forward, as you've got greenfield development for mine sites, the opportunity to integrate renewables into the design of that site and the engineering of that site, such that you can build a renewable system that has a higher level of integration with the extraction process. That today is probably the biggest opportunity to reduce the carbon intensity of the mining process. However, further down on the supply chain, once you sort of hit the transport piece of this, and then into the metals processing and minerals processing, where you've got things like process heat, or if you're looking at a iron processing, you've got the reduction process, which is highly carbon intensive, but that's based on a feedstock and not necessarily energy emissions or emissions from energy production. Then it becomes more of a challenge. So we looked at technologies such as hydrogen and other potential feedstock substitutes, and projecting when those might become available to integrate into those processes. Another finding of the report is that challenges exist today, particularly in, let's say, the contracting process for renewables developers to work with mining operators. The issue there being that life of mine may not necessarily correspond to the term that renewables operators or renewables developers typically look for in a power purchase contract. This is obviously going to vary by jurisdiction, but when you've got technologies that have lives, contractual life in the United States, it's typically around 20 years, but these technologies can last longer. So there are some challenges in meeting the commercial interests of the renewable energy developer with the mine site operator. And some of those are being sort of hashed out today. These projects are going in the ground, so we're seeing some positive signs there. And one last thing I'll mention from the report is the difficulty of variability of renewable technologies, particularly when storage. Lithium ion storage is available today. The duration isn't such that it would allow for an extensive carryover during a period when you don't have generation from, say, wind or solar technologies. And longer duration storage technologies are a few years out. Hydrogen there, again, can play a big role, but this is a future-looking sort of opportunity. It's not quite at the cost point where it makes sense. So today you've got an issue where integrating variable renewables, you can do it, particularly if you optimize the situation such that you can dispatch at appropriate times, and you're always forecasting, and you've got a microgrid controller, say, to run the technologies. However, it's not something at this point where we think a 24/7 mining operation can benefit from the full suite of renewable implementation. This is still something that we're waiting on some longer duration storage and maybe some more economical storage to see.
That's very insightful. Thanks, Travis.
Perrine, CCSI has a long track record of collaborating with the World Bank, NREL, and many other institutions, as well as governments, non-governmental organizations, private sector actors, and other stakeholders to ensure that mining is leveraged to optimize sustainable development. In your experience working across these stakeholder groups, what are some innovative examples of how mining has contributed to the UN SDGs, particularly on affordable and clean energy and climate action?
Thank you, Christy. I think it's a great question because contributing to both SDG 7 and 13 turns out to be quite rare in the mining sector. And in our study, The Renewable Power of the Mine, we found only 2 case studies where the renewable energy project was also serving the communities. One is in Australia with Rio Tinto, and one is in PNG with Lihir, that is now Newcrest. And each time, basically, the mine and the communities are together in a mini grid, and the company's renewable energy project injects renewable power into the mini grid. So it's hybridized. So the mini grid is now a mix of diesel and solar in the context of Australia, and diesel and geothermal in the context of PNG. Another interesting example is in Burkina Faso, where Yam Gold has reportedly developed plans with the government in order for the government to take over the renewable energy project post-closure. which is an important move that is not done by all companies. Other interesting examples are the crossing of SDGs 6, 12, and 13. For instance, at a Chilean mine, Anglo American slows water evaporation of a tailings dam with a solar plant that provides shade. And it enables the use of the water to cover 45% of the mine needs while reducing tailings dam failure risk. So obviously, to avoid failure, it is better to avoid building wet tailings dams. But this example can be a good mitigation measure. So these are a few innovative examples, but the problem from our perspective with mining companies is that they don't necessarily streamline good practices across their mine sites, even within the same company. So at the end, there is a huge missed opportunity for the SDGs.
Well, seeing various strategies that mining companies have taken, what do you see as some of the key opportunities for mining companies to expand positive impacts on these goals?
Yeah, it's another good question. So the SDGs are often seen as a menu of options, but in fact, we forget that they actually provide ambitious targets to achieve by 2030. A target framework, an indicator frameworks, and these indicators could and should be turned into strategic KPIs, as well as variables for the bonus. And for me, that's one of the important strategies that I would recommend. And some companies have actually started understanding that. For instance, Anglo American is developing a waterless mine pilot as a model to operate in the water stress areas. The largest mining companies have now committed to carbon neutrality by 2050, at least on scope 1 and 2. And a bold move comes from BHP CEO, whose bonus is now tied to the performance on scope 3 emission reduction. So these are examples of using the SDG targets to trigger very bold actions towards the achievement of the SDGs.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for that, Perrine. And so this is another question for all three of you. Debates around climate action often focus on mining versus climate action, or climate action versus jobs and economic growth. How do you respond to such arguments as they concern mining and the transition toward green energy?
Maybe I can start. And from the World Bank's perspective, you know, as our reports show, there will be no climate action without mining. We will need mining in order to get there. I mean, if we want to meet our climate ambitions, we need to get there. We need to do more mining. You know, and our numbers really show that the more ambitious we are in our climate targets, the more mining minerals and metals we will need. So we need to understand that. And I think that this message is a lot more clear now than, you know, when we first published our report. And I think it's something that the mining community understands, but perhaps there's still some advocacy there that needs to be done in order to get everybody on board and to understand that it is a challenge and an opportunity, right? So for us, it's really clear to see that, you know, we have more and more understanding of this fact. And as you see, for example, today, as something that you did not see before is that end users of these minerals and metals are more concerned about where they're sourcing their minerals from. You know, that was not the case 5-6 years ago. So the supply chain of these critical minerals that will supply, you know, the materials for the clean energy technologies, I mean, it's not as fragmented as before. It's really becoming a lot more homogeneous in a sense that you have everybody working towards the same goal, right? Because of pressures from investors, of pressures from consumers. So there's a big opportunity there to really understand that it's a process, and that the mining side is also going to be key if we want to get to building this low carbon future.
Thank you. Travis, do you have any thoughts about this debate that we've been hearing lately?
I do. I will echo Danielle's last point there, that she framed this in terms of pressures, and I would just say that it certainly is pressure, but I think it's also a general sort of understanding that the incumbent technologies and practices for extractive industries are not going to deliver the kinds of goals that we want, and we're seeing this, as Danielle pointed out, from investors, from the downstream purchasers of these commodities. And the Business Roundtable came out with that statement a couple of years ago where it was promoting stakeholder value, sort of right alongside shareholder value. I think that the business community across industries is waking up to the fact that the prevailing ways of doing business are changing, and it's no longer there's no longer tension, or that tension is relieving sort of at a rate we've not seen before, between, let's say, doing the right thing and getting business done. There's renewable technologies today that they're not baseload power. They may, in certain instances, cost more than traditional technologies, but the technology cost curves are falling, and the practices for integrating these technologies, the learning curve is on a sort of exponential up ramp right now. So we'll only see more and more of this. It's making business sense. It's making economic sense to work with these things. And the R&D community, to which I belong, is very invested in advancing technologies such as hydrogen and alternative fuels and alternative feedstocks and things like that to reduce process emissions. We're only going to see these things grow in terms of making the business case palatable for these companies. So I would say that while we're on the path there, the general will exists to get us there amongst the companies, amongst the regulators, amongst policymakers. So this sort of big push that we're seeing amongst all the players, amongst all the stakeholders, is really sort of relieved that conflict, I think, to which you referred in your question there.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Travis. I think that you and Danielle have both hit the point on the head that it just makes business sense to be integrating climate action into business operations. It's going to become more par for the course, I think. That's the trend we're seeing. Perrine, is there anything else that you wanted to add to this conversation?
Yes, I guess it's a complementary perspective. For me, this debate in particular, the one on climate action versus job and economic growth in the mining sector, for me, that emerges from both silo thinking and from lobbying effort to slow down ambitious climate action. And it reminds me of the debate surrounding the Green New Deal in America or Europe at a broader level. I think we need to really stop this disconnect between the industrial policy and the climate change policy, and actually industrialize through the green transition. Interestingly, renewable energy projects create 3 times more jobs than fossil fuel projects. So, for instance, for a mining company that is about to downsize because of automation, a renewable energy project would provide an opportunity to recreate jobs in the community. And so in some countries, this is very well understood by both the government and the mining sector. You take Chile or Sweden, and there is a full public-private collaboration around this type of issue, and it is working well. And maybe Daniel can testify in Chile, given the CSM roadmap in Chile.
Great. Thank you so much, Perrine.
Well, as we wrap up this discussion, we recognize there are so many great examples that you've shared of action by mining companies. But in times of crisis, whether it's a major downturn in price of commodities or the impacts of the current COVID-19 pandemic, it's very tempting for companies and other actors to stall progress on initiatives that advance sustainable development. What can we learn from this current pandemic that will help us be prepared for future emergencies without stalling efforts on climate action and other sustainable development objectives? Maybe, Perrine, you could kick us off on this topic.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this COVID crisis has brought back the worst days of mining. Typically, during the absence of protests, some countries have downgraded their labor and environmental regulations. Some companies have forced consent on communities, have negotiated very bad fiscal deals. So that's quite terrible. But for some other companies and for their investors, on the contrary, it has been a wake-up call on the need to embed the SDGs into the strategy of the company for the company to be more resilient going forward. And being more resilient can mean many things, but it might, in the context of mining communities, it might mean working with the community on climate adaptation, on plans post-closure, on localizing the value chain, on securing true and genuine consent from communities with genuine FPIC processes. These are just examples, but there is a lot to do to rebuild better after this crisis.
Thank you. Travis, what would you add?
I'm going to take that last phrase that Perrine used and extend it just a little bit. In addition to working directly with the companies, I think the leadership from the top, from governments and policymakers, is extremely important at a time like this. Building Back Better. We've all read the articles and the thought leadership on this from IEA and The Economist. It's been published far and wide that the old bromide by this point is that it's a shame to waste a crisis, and I think a lot of people are starting to think that way. In what way can we take this opportunity to hit a reset button and figure out that if large amounts of stimulus are going to be required to carry us through this economic downturn, what are the ways we can invest to build a better future, to build back better, essentially. Those decisions largely rest, at least at the stimulus level, with policymakers and central banks. So I think there's a huge opportunity there for those parties to be thinking about how they can direct the flow of capital to the industries and the practices that will deliver better outcomes at the business level. And that goes for mining and elsewhere.
Thank you. Danielle, what would you add? What is the World Bank seeing as some of the key opportunities to leverage in this moment and key takeaways that can help us learn and be better prepared in the future?
Yes, so I think the first one is building a little bit on what Perrine just said. We just had the World Bank's annual meetings, and the role extractive industries will play in rebuilding countries' economy will be an important one. But we need to ensure that we keep working with these countries and these governments to strengthen governance in these countries, so that new projects or even expanding existing ones, in an attempt to boost the economy, that we don't cut corners and then compromise on sustainability, because that's a legitimate risk that, as you want to scale up mining and you want new, revenues, there is a risk that you will cut corners, and then you have, you kind of go back on some of the progress you made in terms of sustainability. So that's one. The other thing, we just conducted a research looking at the impacts of COVID on critical minerals and how the crisis was impacting critical minerals. And for us, there were two very different set of issues. The first was very much related to immediate impacts from COVID, and the other was more long-term. And in terms of the immediate, three were more very visible. The first one was really how mine operations were not that affected, really. I mean, some were, depending, of course, on the size of your operation, but it was more on the supply side. I mean, the implementation of and the manufacturing side. It was not so much on the mines. The second thing was that there was a notable reduction in investments in new projects. There was like a complete halt in some ways because of the uncertainties and also on the volatility of the price of commodities. So there was that. And also one that was very interesting was the relation between mining companies and communities, and the need to really work with communities and in these situations, because it was really up to this relationship being strengthened and being done well, that your impacts from the COVID crisis were more significant or less, depending on the health of that relationship. So those were the three main key findings from this recent research.
Excellent. Well, I'll turn the floor over to Ashley to wrap up our discussion today. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you so much. And just in the few moments that we have left, if anyone wants to share anything else about their work with mining and clean energy, just really quickly to leave us with something to think about for the rest of the day, feel free to share.
Maybe a concluding word, but that is really echoing what we've all said throughout this session, is that because the green transition is so mining intensive, as the World Bank reports have shown, mining has this incredible responsibility to ensure that the green transition doesn't only work for SDG 13, but for all the SDGs, because we need all of them to be achieved and not some of them. So at CCSI, we're standing by and trying to find solutions in collaboration with other actors to overcome all these challenges.
Thank you so much, Perrine. Anything else that anyone wanted to share?
I'll say real quickly that I think mining companies have a reputation, like banks, of wanting to be the first to be second to adopt and implement. But it's been very heartening to hear from these companies that they are invested in implementing the technologies that will help them transition to lower carbon operations. They're looking at this in a way that they never have before, and organizations such as Energy and Mines are out there putting on these conferences and bringing them all together, and collaboration is key to figuring out how to advance in a low carbon extraction future. So I will just leave it on a positive note to say that I think that the companies are exercising the foresight and the cooperative instincts to get to their goals. So the view is positive from where we sit, at least.
Thank you. Danielle, any parting thoughts?
Yes,
before we go?
I would also like to end it on a positive note. I mean, I've been working in the industry for more than 20 years. And I think that we're seeing now is really an opportunity. You see really policy momentum building. You see, the integration of ESG into investment mandates. You see, growth in green financing, and all that is a reflection of this really need to change. And I think that we're in a bit of a crossroad right now, and that we are hopefully going the right direction, that this change will be reflected in the industry in general going forward. So I think we're seeing something positive, and I'm hoping with the work we're all doing will be contributing to that. Thank you.
Yes, it certainly is. Thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing your insights and expertise with us today, for being a part of the Mining Summit. We are so happy to have you.